Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope everyone is doing well and staying warm. My name is Hong Lim, and I'm calling this meeting to order. So welcome. This is the first MetroPlan Orlando Technical Advisory Committee meeting for 2025. So like I said, my name is Hong Lim, and I'm with City Winter Park, and I'll be the 2025 chair. And also we have Vice Chair, Mr. Lenny Barden with City of Altamont Springs. Just as a reminder, the committee members need to come in to this meeting in person for quorum requirements, and members attending online may not vote, but they may comment and participate in discussion. And to participate virtually, please use the raise hand feature. There are two public comment points in this meeting, and for now, I'll just turn it over to Slate for agenda review.
All right, thanks, Hong. Good morning again, everyone. And welcome back to TAC 2025. If this is your first meeting with TAC, either as a primary or alternate, just if you have a second after the meeting, please come up. I want to put a face to a name, or at the very least, a face to a small box on the screen. We just have a couple of announcements today. As a reminder, the FDOT Safe Routes to School grant applications are due January 29th. Please visit their website, or if you want, you can ask a member of MetroPlan Orlando staff. We can get you more info. Every year, MetroPlan Orlando puts out a call for new Community Advisory Committee members. If you happen to know anyone who may be interested, whether that be, a friend, a neighbor, anyone who uses the transportation system is technically qualified. So you can go to metroplanorlando.gov/CAC. Those applications are also due on the 29th. Oh, and I misspoke earlier. The Safe Routes to School deadline is the 31st, not the 29th. And lastly, we have a slight change to the agenda to our tip amendment item. Jason will be able to tell you more about that when we get to the action item section. And with that, I can turn it over to Mike for the safety moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Slade, and good morning, everyone. We've come full circle to another January safety moment to talk about the move over law. And just a brief refresher on that, that if you are traveling down the road and there is someone on the shoulder, either an emergency vehicle, law enforcement, anyone basically with a disabled vehicle or working along the road, all of those, you are to vacate the lane if you can, and if not, to reduce your speed by 20 miles per hour, less than the posted speed. Unfortunately, does not yet apply to pedestrians or bicyclists. Been some discussion about expanding it to that. But and along those lines, we took a look at our detailed pedestrian and bicycle crash data and looked at serious and fatal crashes. And there are about 9 per year that involve disabled vehicles or emergency vehicles or road workers, while there are about a dozen a year involving pedestrians or cyclists traveling along the roadway. So hopefully at some point we can bring them in under that law as well. Moving on to an update on our Vision Zero planning efforts. We are working with Castleberry and Seminole County regarding our complementary planning efforts with our supplemental grants. We also have our 3 ongoing demonstration projects with the 3 counties. A refresher on that, with Orange County, we're in development of a middle school bicycle program. For Seminole County, doing close call near miss analysis with the traffic signal system with some smart technology, and with Osceola County identifying some intersections in need of improved pedestrian crossing opportunities. We've got a Federal Highway Administration road safety audit training coming up in February. Hope some of you can attend that. It's a two-parter. There's two opportunities, one in Osceola County and looking at Point Siena Boulevard as the study road, and one for Orange County, looking at University Boulevard over near UCF. And then lastly, reminder on, we are still doing our Vision Zero Task Force meetings, and our first one for the year coming up in March on the 18th. And that concludes my report for this month. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions? All right, thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Rachel for roll call.
Thank you. Burden,
Here.
Brock,
Here.
Brown, Cash,
Here.
Casolero, Castro,
Here.
Cologne, Hambley for Cornelison,
Here.
Coulon,
Present.
Crandell,
Here.
Delachey, Ide,
Present.
Falk,
Here.
Gomez, Hamza, Hardwick,
Here.
Hassan,
Here.
Kehoe, Krug, Lim,
Here.
Lopez,
Here.
Mendenhall,
Here.
Nelson, O'Keefe, Price,
Present.
Hullum, Ramos, Recchi,
Here.
Roll,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Sanders,
Here.
Senerans, Mukherjee for Smith,
Here.
Story,
Here.
Torres,
Here.
Wharton,
Here.
Martello for Williams,
Here.
Yeargone.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the roll call. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Miss Rachel. I do apologize. I totally skipped an agenda item, which is the agency report right before the roll call. So with agency report, this is an opportunity for partner agency to speak to our committee. If any partners want to speak here, please let Rachel or Slade know. For now, I'm turning it over to Mr. Jonathan Scarf for the FDOT report.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I will be brief due to the full agenda we have this morning. In your information package, you have your monthly construction report. If you have any questions regarding any of those projects, I'll make myself available following the meeting, and we can look into whatever question you have on that regarding that. I want to send a brief reminder for the 2055 Florida Transportation Plan. That's our 30-year blueprint. There's probably been some engagement previously over this. We have some focus groups that are on the horizon for that might be of interest, and obviously, we encourage participation and are soliciting it. So first, the workforce development meeting, that'll be January 28th at 10 a.m. The resilient infrastructure meeting is January 30th at 10 a.m. And the technology meeting, again, is January 30th at 2 p.m. Those can be attended virtually or in person, and you can find that on floridaftp.com, as well as some of the previous materials of past steering committees and focus groups. And then you have one upcoming, we have one upcoming public meeting for a safety project that is on February 19th, and that is for a pedestrian hybrid beacon. And that's at Unity of Central Florida Church, 771 Holden Avenue, Orlando, Florida. And that's any time between 5:30 and 7. So pending questions, Mr. Chair, that's all I have for this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Scarf. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. We have 3 common presentations today. These presentations are intended to be a combined presentation for both TAC and TISMO, which is why it's presented at the beginning of this meeting. Members with questions can stand their nameplate at the end of the table. Please remember to turn on your mic when you're having a question. The first common presentation is with the Florida Sunshine Law refresher from Miss Virginia Whittington. Miss Whittington?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. For those of you who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, I'm Virginia Whittington, Director of Regional Partnerships here at Metro Plan Orlando. And I'm here to give you an update, which is your annual refresher on the Florida Government and the Sunshine Laws. We do this each year just as a place where we can set the ground and have everybody on the same level playing field, just to go through these real quickly. We do this to each of our advisory committees. So for the Florida Government and Sunshine and the meetings that are conducted, there are 3 basic tenets of the Florida Government and the Sunshine and public records, is that the meetings must be open and accessible to the public, not just accessible in terms of them being able to access them on the website, but also accessible in terms of people being able to attend the meetings. So we are very particular about making sure that any meetings that are held off-site are also held along a links route where people would have the ability to attend. The second is that we are required to give reasonable notice of the meetings to the public. Metro Plan Orlando's policy is that we give 7 to 10 days notice whenever we're going to be having a meeting. And then finally, there has to be a record of that meeting. It could be highlights, it could be the meeting minutes that you all get. The law does not state that meetings have to be recorded, but we feel that that is another way to have openness and transparency to the public. And so Metro Plan Orlando does record our meetings. And it also helps with Rachel and Lisa when they go back to process and do the minutes, they have something to be able to refer to. So our public meetings are defined in Florida Statute 286.011. And this is all meetings that are of a board, commission, committees of state agencies or authority. And then those committees or advisory groups that are established by those boards and commissions. And it also equally applies to elected or appointed board members, committee members, and those who may be on task forces. So what does that mean? It means that the Sunshine Law applies to all of our advisory committees. Technical Advisory Committee, our TISMO, which just met, some of you are a part of. And then those special purpose task forces that may be developed or established for a certain purpose, even though they may sunset after a time certain. So those working groups. And those all, the Sunshine Law applies because the work of those committees come back to this board or committee, and then eventually gets presented to the Metro Plan Orlando Board. So what qualifies as a meeting? A meeting is any gathering where 2 or more members of the same committee, 2 or more who sit around the same dais at the same time to conduct business constitutes a meeting. And I'll go into some of the other ways in just a moment. But if the discussion comes up during that meeting where there's 2 people or 3 people of any matter that could foreseeably come before this body for approval, that qualifies as a meeting. I did a little Google search when I was preparing for this, and to the right, you see some headlines over the past just 2 years of instances where violations were found, ethics were questioned, and in some of these instances, people ended up having to turn themselves in to serve a 60-day jail vacation. So we wanted to just call attention, and the reason I put this here was to show you that it is alive and well. And these are just the ones that actually make it to the headlines. It's just a number that we're not familiar with of those things that come forward or the accusations that are made that people have to defend. So what are those forms of communication? Conversations between 2 people over coffee, at lunch, in the parking garage, after your meeting. If someone can perceive or conceivably look and come to the determination, they must be talking about what happened in this meeting. It's worse to have to defend that than it is to just shun the very appearance of meeting. And so we ask you to just be careful and cognizant. This goes over to your electronic devices, emails, social media, text messages, courier pigeons, shoestrings and cans, any way that you communicate up to and including a person who may go as a conduit between one person and another. That is also a violation of the Sunshine Law. So I just mentioned some of the sanctions, unintentional violations. That's when an unintentional violation, it may be you reply all to an email. You will notice that Metro Plan Orlando staff is very careful to send, when we send things to you, that we blind copy everyone so that you don't inadvertently reply to all. So we do our best to try and help alleviate those unintentional violations. Passing a note from one person to another in the middle of a meeting. You may be saying, where are we going for lunch today? But the perception, and someone calls attention to that. If it is founded, again, unintentional violation. Knowingly violating, a second-degree misdemeanor, up to $500 fine, 60 days in jail, ton of attorney fees, removal from the committee, and also could undo all of the recommendations that have come forward on that item. So when in doubt, please reach out to your board services committee. If you have to have lunch, or here is another caveat, professional organizations and professional memberships that you may have, many of you find yourselves in the same room with one another. That does not constitute a Sunshine Law violation unless you talk about things that could foreseeably come before this body for action. So we just encourage you to just be careful about your conversations, because if it comes to us, we will have to testify in the court of law, and we will raise our right hand and tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so with that, Mr. Chair and members, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Ms. Whittington. Any questions? Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from Ms. Taylor Laurent with Metro Plan Orlando on the 2050 MTP status update.
Good morning. So additional information about this update is included in your agenda packets under tab 1, or for our TISMO members, I think it was tab 4. But to get us started, I'm going to highlight our most recent public engagement events. So in total, we've had 15 different in-person engagement events to date under the MTP banner, resulting in 530 in-person interactions roundabout, and 183 surveys completed to help guide the development of our 2050 MTP. The summaries of that feedback that we've been receiving is included in your agenda packets, organized by event, so you can see the feedback from each of your different areas and incorporate that into your projects as well if you see fit. We are continuing our coordination with the Central Florida Regional Planning Model Team with the Department of Transportation. We've been notified that there will be some schedule changes with the model development. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but I will hopefully have more information for you at your next meeting. We are working on finalizing the majority of our technical reports for the 2050 MTP as well, and those will be posted online as they are completed over the coming weeks. And then our needs assessment, which I affectionately refer to as our transportation to-do list, is also nearing completion as well. We've incorporated all of our local agency partners' feedback into the plan, the needs plan, and we are working on making sure that all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed before we move that forward into its next step. And then we are also finalizing the prioritization methodology. We did not receive any requests or comments for revisions based on the proposed draft we shared with you in December. So we are working on completing that documentation and applying it to our transportation to-do list. And as a quick refresher, just to make sure it's top of mind for everyone, our prioritization process is summarized around our 5 goal areas for the MTP: safety, reliability, connectivity, community, and prosperity. And there are three goal areas or three criteria per goal area. These have not changed since the prior version that you've seen in the earlier drafts. It involves a mix of quantitative and qualitative measures, and we're moving forward with the proposed recommendations. We did receive a few requests for additional information about the weighting, but the evaluation criteria, once they're measured, are then weighted based on the recommendations you see here. These align closely with the feedback we've received both from our technical partners as well as from those 180 plus surveys that we've received from the public. So it's good to see that regional consensus as we work towards applying this methodology to our transportation projects. And once the weighting is complete, this results in a single priority score per transportation project on our needs list. And then that allows us to have all of the pieces that we need to move forward with the next step of work for the 2050 MTP in this next phase that we're stepping into. And that's our funding scenarios. So the first piece of information we need is that transportation to-do list, which we have, the order in which we're going to address the projects on that transportation to-do list, which we're applying right now. And we need to know the budget with which we have to pay for these transportation projects over the next 25 years, or those revenue forecasts and our control totals, which we also have. So now it's time to talk through what those funding scenarios are and what they will be for this next 2050 plan. So the funding scenarios are meant to help us evaluate how changes in funding allocation change the transportation projects that are actually funded within our region. And as we look at the various options, we're going to be reviewing tangible comparisons between each funding scenario, so we understand the benefits or implications of choosing one scenario versus another. And ultimately, throughout this calendar year, we'll build consensus on a preferred funding scenario, which will become the cost feasible plan for the 2050 MTP. As we look at these scenarios, we want to make sure that they do support our 2050 MTP goals, that they help us achieve our regional performance measures, which you'll hear more from Laura about later on in your agenda today, or you've already heard about during your TISMO presentation. We also want to make sure that the scenarios help provide flexibility to adapt over time as trends and technology continue to evolve. And as we look at what a funding scenario might be, I reflect back on the 2045 plan. So this is the funding policy that was adopted, or the preferred funding scenario, if you will. This is the distribution of Metro Plan Orlando attributable funds, those TMA funds, across four primary categories: complete streets, transit, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, as well as TISMO and other operational types improvements. As we look to develop funding scenarios for the 2050 plan, you'll pardon my metaphors, are these the right slices of the pie chart that we have in front of us? Should there be 5 or 6 slices? Should there only be 3? These are some of the pointed questions we're going to be asking, but also, are these the right sizes for each of the categories? Let's say complete streets, for example. In the past, it was 32% of MPO funding. Should that be more or should that be less? So we're going to be looking at and evaluating these very questions throughout this year. We have started collecting feedback about this through surveys, both to our technical partners as well as the public. So starting with, what slices should we include in that pie chart? Most of the project types that we originally suggested as part of this survey were relatively supported well by our technical participants, as well as by the public, which was really good to see that there's some initial consensus on what we should start with for our 2050 scenario options. And then when we look to what sizes of the slices should that be, our technical respondents reduced some of the allocations across the categories to be able to incorporate a higher percentage of dedicated funding for safety projects, which was interesting to see. And then the public aligned with these responses for the most part as well, but they had higher allocations for transit as well as safety projects compared to our technical respondents. So overall, the key themes that we were seeing across the survey results was a desire to see MPO funding focused off of the state highway system, a desire to see MPO funding on standalone independent projects rather than any goes with support type programs, as well as from the public looking for a distribution of funding across multiple categories, but seeing higher dedicated funding for safety as well as transit. We did receive a few other comments that we're going to be exploring this year as well, including requests to potentially change the Complete Streets policy to allow MPO funds for widening projects. Revisiting that $4 million funding limit per project phase that has been implemented for projects funded by Metro Plan Orlando. And then a request to kind of revisit what local match funding commitments are and what those represent. So for reference, that is in the event that a project cost exceeds $4 million based on the current funding maximum limit. Where does that additional funding come from if the MPO is not able to cover any potential cost overages? So as we explore that this calendar year, those are going to be the primary focus items, developing those funding scenarios, evaluating between those, and ultimately developing our cost feasible plan. With the intent of adopting our 2050 MTP in December of this year. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions?
Under the other comments, for the widening to be included in Complete Streets, was that from, do you know if that was more from the public or more from the technical workshop?
That was a technical respondent.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right, our last comment presentation is from Mr. Miles O'Keefe with Links to present the Links Transit Development Plan annual update.
All right. Good morning, friends. Here to do a little show and tell on our transit development plan. May not be unfamiliar to some of you as we've engaged with you in our plan developments in the past, but with new rules coming down from the state legislature, we are now required to come about and present to Metro Plan, and I'll talk a bit about that. So we'll go over a bit of a background. What is the Transit Development Plan, the TDP? The revised rule that has brought me here today. Some of the plan goals were developed a couple of years ago as part of our major update. And then as was required with the TDP, it's kind of like a report card back to the state. So we review our accomplishments and then highlight some of the plans and projects that are either ongoing or going to be coming up here in the next year. And then lastly, just share with you the next steps for this overall TDP process. So the TDP, first and foremost, it all gets back to money, right? So if we don't do this plan every year, we are not eligible for block grants from the state. So in addition to be good planning practice and helping us think about what we want to do, it opens the door for some money for us. It does identify needs, service-related, capital investment related over a 10-year planning horizon. So every 5 years, we do a major update, and that's a full reset of that 10-year planning outlook. But annually, we shift the planning horizon. So we add a new 1 year, and we add the 10th year at the end, allowing us to look maybe more clearly what's actually going to happen this forthcoming year, and then to throw in anything that might be coming up into that 10th year. As I mentioned, every 5 years we do a major update. That's where we really get involved. We might come to you and your respective agency more directly, seeing like what's in your pipeline, what do you want to see changed in your area. Whereas the annual, it's us just looking, what did we say we were going to do this past year? Did we do it? Why or why not? Did we do something we weren't planning on doing? Why did that happen? Big change came about with this past summer from the state. Two big pieces. One, it changed the due date. Historically, it was due September 1st. So we would do this process end of spring, late summer, go to the links board, be on our way with submittal, review things in the fall, and get our concurrence from the state. Now it's more lined up with the state fiscal year. So instead of submitting this past September, we were graced with an extra 6 months. These are now due on March 1st to the state. That way they can adopt and review, and it'll be in sync with their fiscal year starting July. The other piece is they want to see direct involvement with the Metro Plan or the MPO in the respective area. So historically, we've done those things, but now the clear requirement is to present to your respective MPO's board. There's no adoption required. Me being here today is not required. We're just going above and beyond because why leave all the fun just for the MPO board? We want to be here with all of you as well. So that Metro Plan coordination, historically, we've been involved with the LRTP development, as you all have. Of course, that carries over into the MTP. So this time around, it was a little bit different. The TDP was kind of folded into the transit vision plan, which becomes a key piece of the transit element in the 2050 MTP. We hold monthly coordination calls with MetroPlan staff as well, just to make sure that we know they know everything that's involved about our respective projects, how we can help each other. That new requirement is, as I mentioned, presenting to the MetroPlan board, not for any kind of adoption or authorization, just presenting. So that'll be something we document, but as noted, we're going above and beyond, coming to all the MetroPlan committees as well. So as far as the goals, these were developed actually 2 major updates ago. We just carried them forward. They're based off of the agency's mission, vision, values, what leadership thinks is important at the time. So focusing on 4 key pillars of passengers, employees, operations of the agency, and then our plans. They came up with these 4 areas: delivering a seamless network, having an equitable, safe, performance-driven system, and of course, focusing, as we are a service provider, on the customer experience and their communications with them, and then doing our best to promote any kind of economic competitiveness, sustainability, and improving quality of life for the region. So tied to each of these goals, we like to identify our accomplishments for our board. So this presentation I'm sharing with you today is what we present to the links committees and board as well. Not going to read through all of these, but just to highlight some of the stuff that did happen this past year. We did introduce a new express bus from MCO over to key transfer points: Sand Lake, Sunrail, Florida Mall, Destination Parkway, over to Disney Springs. That was a connection that existed probably over a decade ago now. It went away. It was only serving Sand Lake, Sunrail over to MCO. So now we have that kind of longer connection for the tourist corridor back. And that was in partnership with Orange County on that one, making sure that that got in place. A lot of increased frequency on the weekends. We all hear, for Sunrail's sake, there should be later night, there should be weekend service. It's no different for us. Our weekend service is scaled back compared to the weekdays. So it's something we try and do incrementally when we can, increase those frequencies for our travelers, both our residents and our guests. In terms of equitable, performance-driven, there's some things that we're focusing on, some things that might come up in MetroPlan committees in terms of like ADA. We know a lot of you have had to do your own respective ADA transition plans. It's something we wanted to get a handle on ourselves, focusing on the fleet. When we procure them, of course, they're ADA compliant. So it's not necessarily are they, it's the status of the equipment that is the accessibility equipment that we're looking at. Our facilities, is there any rehab, reconstruction that we need to do to make sure that as they were built maybe 20 plus years ago, anything that, ensure that future employees and guests can access the facilities. And then the key pieces are stops, our 4,300 bus stops. We know there are varying degrees of accessibility based off of the roadway conditions that they're placed along. So that's going to be the big piece as we go forward, something that we want to be able to use and share with many of you as you're working on your respective projects, something that we can share as kind of our annual plan. How are we going to address these bus stops? What do we think is important? We're putting together our own kind of categorization, our tiers of what needs to be addressed, what should be addressed. Tie that with other programs like Orange County's ATSP. How can we kind of 2 birds, 1 stone? We're meeting ADA transition, but we're also helping the county, improve some bus stops there. Vision Zero elements for the city of Orlando is something we think we can tie into that as well. Other key piece, big projects we've been working on is 436, the portion that's in the city of Orlando, working on a transit-oriented development planning project, seeing what we can get in ahead of time before we seek any kind of federal funding. So the feds would see that the locals are investing in the planning requirements that would support transit in terms of density and population that would access any kind of bus rapid transit on that corridor. Enhancing the customer experience. I think the big one we did just past November was introducing tap to pay on our fare system. So we had the old paper magnetic strip that you could do. We also had the mobile app that you could use to pay, but almost everybody now has a tap to pay debit card, credit card. So that this allows us to use Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, whatever kind of near field connection, NFC payment, but also you can use your own debit card or credit card that you have on hand to pay and use the fares instead of having to download a new app or find a fare box or find the correct change to make any kind of payment. And then this past year, we did complete the Swan Shuttle autonomous vehicle pilot downtown. Doug Jameson presented on that not too long ago to this committee. Economic competitiveness. from our standpoint, we've never done a sustainability or resilience plan. It's the Protect program is something that came out in this past administration from the federal level. We took that as an opportunity to look at resiliency from our own, and we don't control the infrastructure, but it's how do we interact with it? What might be some fatal flaws or things we have to be aware of as an agency to plan for. And then the sustainability is kind of general. Many of you have your own, say, carbon goals. It's how do we tie into those in our own plans. This really opens the door for more funding opportunities for the agency. So it's a good plan that we can point back on. And then we can tap into additional funding like the Protect funding from the federal government. Things like hardening for severe storms, for example. And then hopefully here soon, we will be opening up the Pine Hills Transfer Center off of Pine Hills and Belco Drive near Evans High School. So we're very excited about that. That's kind of the Link super stop of the future. There's gonna be a lot more at it than you see at the traditional super stop. So we're hoping that that really enhances the quality of life and the way that the passengers in that community can access public transit. As far as things that are active, things that are going forward, big one is Southern Operations and Maintenance Facility. We have one primary base located off of Links Lane, John Young, and Princeton. If that were to be compromised for any kind of reason, public transit would effectively cease to function in the bus capacity here in Central Florida. So we're looking at another base where the region's growing, which tends to be towards the south, speccing that facility out for not just the natural gas fleet that we have today, but a no emission fleet going forward. So it's been about 2+ years of consistent effort on that one. Hopefully, we can do a little more show and tell on that one in the near future. But that's been a project that's needed for continuity of operations and any potential expansion in the future. Another thing that I hope to share with lots of you in terms of respective planning beyond the ADA transition plan is our bus stop design guideline. We think that this is going to be a useful tool. You might hear comments from electeds or the public and say, why is my bus stop only a pole in the ground? It's not great. What's up? This is basically a cheat sheet. Here's the hierarchy of bus stops based off of whatever metrics, largely is ridership, but it could also get down to land use and zoning at the site, the activity centers that are located next to it. It'll be a way for you to reference and say, okay, this stop based off of these criteria should have these amenities at it. It might be overbuilt, it might be underbuilt, but it'll also feed into like the layers of our analysis and how do we go about updating, relocating, the bus stops throughout the system, because over the 3 counties and 4,300 bus stops, it takes a bit of time. This will just help us focus and share that with you all, how we go about making any changes. Going forward, we've been working with GOA on a bus transfer facility. Currently, we're located at Terminal A, but we're looking to relocate to the train station, the intermodal facility, Terminal C, whatever it's been called in the past, whatever we're calling it now, whatever you're familiar with. We want to be at that nexus of mobility, that multimodality at the airport. I'm very excited to keep working on that. And then, of course, as Epic Universe comes into play, we're already preparing to shift service to serve and support employees at the new park there at Universal. As far as next steps go, here today, sharing with you all, we were at CAC earlier this week. Of course, we'll be in front of MAC and then the Metro Plan Board in February. We'll be then going to the Links Board of Directors at the end of February in order to submit on time by March 1st to FDOT. They'll then have their time to review it. They'll get back to us with any questions, clarifications, or just the good old, check mark, thumbs up, we're good to go. We can close out the process and then we're eligible for the block grant funding from the state. With that, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple here. As you know, we're doing the Four Corners project right now, and we're coordinating with the different transportation agencies, Citrus Connect, Lake Express, and Links. We've been hearing some feedback from those in the Four Corners and Horizon West area that currently there's a demand-based program in place for bus stops, but as new apartments come on, there's a lack of service between when those come online and when the buses begin servicing those areas. And so I don't know what the answer is there, but that is something that we keep hearing quite a bit of feedback on. And then the other thing that keeps coming up, and this may be more for Ms. Hardwick. There's been a lot of questions regarding the bus-only lanes, specifically in downtown and then on Corkman. I know that they have some on the Corkman extension. Previously, there were plans to possibly do a bus-only lane farther up Corkman and then along 50 UCF, and then also one on 192. And I know that it's been mentioned in the 446 project as well. So if you could give us a quick update on that.
On all of that? Money. Thank you. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to is the funding commitment on the local level for any of the corridor projects, in particular where the bus rapid transit's been studied, 50, 192, 436. So in the interim, to make sure the projects don't get too dusty on the shelf, that's why we're doing things like the 436 TOD study, keeping it fresh in people's minds, reminding them that, especially for the local champions, it's a project that matters, that we still see value in. It's something that we've previously included in the Orange County Transportation Initiative in the transit plan, these corridors, at least 50 and 436 for these enhanced transit services like bus rapid transit. In terms of service on the periphery, Horizon West area, Four Corners, yeah, it's a little tougher to get out there because you got diminishing returns. Yes, there's density. It's understanding after some time where they're actually traveling to. So that's an opportunity for us to work with like Metroplan Orlando and the streetlight data they have. Getting them to run some analysis. Are they going to key common destinations? It was something that was discussed in that specifically like Flamingo Crossing area. We knew a lot of Disney employees were supposed to locate there, assuming they would actually work at Disney from that location. Was there a smaller level of service that we could provide, perhaps using our NeighborLink service? Not expecting a full 40-foot bus to always be occupied in that regard. And you get to kind of like peak travel. Are we just doing 1 or 2 trips in the morning or evening? It is tough to support that in terms of an operations piece, making sure there's operators just for that and then interlining it with other service. But it is, yes, does take time to, one, understand the travel patterns of these new developments, especially on the outside of the service area. But then to also get a funding commitment. We can start things off with a service development grant from FDOT. That's good for 2 to 3 years, but then there needs to be a guarantee of local funding commitment once the service is over or the funding is over from FDOT to continue it on if it did prove of merit in terms of ridership. So a lot of times what we end up seeing is that the ridership wasn't there. We might have started service too early when a development came on and travel patterns hadn't really been solidified. People are too comfortable still using their car out in those areas. We've seen it a lot with service that we try to start in the Lake Nona area. So I think we're probably going to hold off on new service introductions unless there's a clear like commitment on the local funding piece and there's maybe a more established travel pattern from these areas.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yes.
I guess a quick answer and a question. So for downtown, we continue to look at, the city of Orlando continues to look at, as we're looking at two-waying some streets and all of that, we're looking at the BRT lanes and how to integrate all of the transit and all of the other things that we're doing. And then for the 50 and 436 corridors, a big part of it is making sure that we're looking at and updating our adjacent land uses so that when we do get funding, the royal we, that we have that the backbone of the corridor can accommodate transit with the higher frequency. The question I have, Miles, is with the updates for the bus stop design guide, does that also include updates to the actual design of the stops, the kind of infrastructure, or is it more just a hierarchy? And one of the main reasons I ask is when when we're working with developers and we encourage them or require bus stop improvements and all of that, just wanting to make sure we understand what those potential costs and what that looks like as early in the process, and encouraging modular designs and stuff that make it easier to.
Clarity, consistency, exactly. So the bus stop design guide is primarily the hierarchy. The pieces, parts that you would see there, we're not looking to change the shelter designs. If a specific jurisdiction likes a certain design, we note that in the plan. So if City of Orlando likes a style, that's the style that's identified. We're not trying to go through procurement for new design and then a new manufacturer of that new design at this time. For consistency's sake, our amenities team, it's a small team, a handful of hardworking individuals. We want to make it as easy for them on the 4,300 bus stops that they have to maintain. A quarter of which have a shelter. So, yeah, I think that's the short answer to that.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is the public comments for action items. We will now hear public comments on the action items. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. If any members of the public wish to comment and are joining us virtually, please use the raise hand function, and you'll be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll send you a prompt to unmute your mic. Do we have anyone joining us virtually who would like to make a comment?
Chairman, we have no hands raised online.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public attending in person that wish to make a public comment?
No comments received.
Are there any written comments?
None received.
Thank you. With that, we can go straight to the action items. The first action item is the December 6th, 2024 meeting minutes. Is there any, can I get a motion?
Second, Sanders.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or revision that needs to be made on the minutes? Okay, seeing none. This is a voice vote. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. The second action item is the amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program, and Mr. Jason Sartorio will explain more on this.
Morning, Chairman and committee members. This morning I have one tip amendment for you. Additional information regarding this amendment is located in tab 3 of your agendas. As you recall, during the December cycle, project number 447104-1 was pulled from the agenda at the recommendation of Metro Plan Orlando staff for additional review. During the review process, it was discovered, as described in the FDOT amendment letter that's located in your agendas, that Metro Plan Orlando's urban attributable TMA funds were needed to balance the FDOT work program following legislative approval appropriations to local governments in the region. Following coordination with FDOT work program staff and with the acknowledgement that the use of TMA funds on the state highway system requires specific approval by Metro Plan Orlando, the TIP amendment request has since been revised and resubmitted. And as Slade mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there is one change from the agendas that were emailed out last week. There's a slight typo. So last week in the agendas, one of the funds was CARL. It is actually supposed to be CARU. And the agendas that are located on the TADENs have the corrected information. And in that case, there is no dollar amount change. It's just that slight typo. As mentioned earlier, you have some additional information on this amendment located in tab 3 of your agendas. With that being said, unless there are any questions, we're asking for your recommendation of approval. Thank you.
May I get a motion?
Motion, Price.
Thank you. Can I get a second? Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from Mrs. Sartorio? Seeing none, this is a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Our third and last action item for today is the support for federal transportation performance targets from Ms. Laura Bach.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is that time of year for us to talk through our federal performance measures. Again, as you may recall, both state DOTs and MPOs are required to follow the transportation performance management, which is an approach just to make sure that our investment decisions are in keeping with our strategic performance goals. So in support of that, we're going to be talking through 3 of the federal measures today, PM1 safety, PM2 bridge and pavement condition, and PM3 system performance and reliability. For the safety performance measure, the metrics that we monitor are the number and rate of fatalities within the region, the number and rate of serious injuries within the region, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. On this slide, on the left-hand side, we are showing the trends for the numbers of fatalities there on the top, and then the numbers of serious injuries within the region over the last 10 years or so. While I'm on this slide, during our TISMO committee meeting, we had a question about the general trends that we're seeing there and whether or not those sort of slopes are the same for both the number and the rate, the crash rates. Did get a chance to take a look at that, Christina. And yes, they're basically tracking in the exact same direction. Slade was Johnny on the spot and was able to send me some charts that sort of showed them on the same axes, so we can share that with you after the meeting. Indeed, for fatalities, yeah. The slopes a little bit less for the rate than it is for the actual numbers, but generally the same trend. So on the right-hand side of the slide, we have the table showing the 5-year rolling average at the statewide level, as well as for the region, as well as the statewide targets for these metrics. And in support of their Target Zero initiative and their related goals, the state has set all of the targets for the safety metrics at 0. And we're recommending as staff that we do the same here in the Metro Plan region, in keeping with our Vision Zero initiative and its related goals. Moving on to bridge and pavement condition, the metrics that we track within this performance measure is the percentage of bridges on the national highway system that are in good versus poor condition by deck area, the percentage of interstate pavement that's in good versus poor condition, and then the percentage of non-interstate pavement that's in good versus poor condition, with good indicating that no major investment is required and poor indicating the opposite. So this slide shows on the left-hand side, pardon me, the statewide metrics over the last 5 years, and then we're showing the Metro Plan Orlando area metrics on the right. The general takeaway is that for at both the statewide level and here in the region, our pavement is in better condition than our target, with the pavement here in the Metro Plan Orlando region in a little bit better condition than the statewide average. This slide summarizes the bridge conditions over the last 5 years with, once again, the statewide metrics there on the left and the metrics for our region on the right. Once again, our bridge conditions are in better condition than our targets, so we're doing well there. And then for our final performance measure that we're talking about today, the metrics that we monitor are the percentage of interstate and non-interstate person miles that are reliable, as well as that truck travel time reliability index. And a similar setup, we have the statewide metrics over the last 5 years on the left with the performance within the region on the right. Generally, what we've been seeing is for our non-interstate roadways, we have better reliability on average here in our region than at the statewide level. However, on our interstates, the reliability is not as good as that statewide average. Maybe not surprising considering we have I-4 within our region. And then similarly, our truck travel time reliability index is a little worse than the statewide average here. So this slide summarizes what we are recommending as staff in terms of targets for each of these measures. For PM1 and PM2, we're recommending that we use the same targets as was set by FDOT. And then for PM3, a little bit different. For the interstate reliability, we're recommending using the same targets that the state is. For the non-interstate reliability, we actually have a little bit more aggressive target since we are trending a little bit better than the statewide average. So this is still a stretch goal for us, but something we think is reachable. And then for truck reliability, travel time index, we have a little bit less aggressive of a target that we're recommending in keeping with what we've been seeing for our trends here in the region. Again, still a stretch goal, but something we think is accomplishable. So we are requesting that you recommend approval of these targets, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have ahead of that motion.
Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, Laura.
Hello, I knew you were coming for me.
Well, so I just wanted to share some of the things that I brought up in the Vision Zero Task Force with the rest of TAC regarding the Target Zero here. I participated in Smart Growth America's Dangerous by Design Technical Assistance this last year, which is groupings of folks who are usually in that top ranked Dangerous by Design report, really trying to dive into how we can communicate results and work towards zero. The group itself found Florida's statewide goal of zero very interesting because we're not meeting that goal and other states don't actually set this at zero. Personally, I agree with the recommendation for Metro Plan staff to set this at zero and the states to set this at zero, but I do think that it needs to be complemented in our planning documents by benchmarks to make sure that we are on track. I think it is incredibly ambitious to say that we'll get to zero in 2 years. We know how long our infrastructure projects take to really make a difference on the roads. So in order to have, to make sure we're on the right track, we need something more than just zero. We need before and after evaluations with our resurfacings and our safety projects, and we need reporting out on if we're bucking the trend when it comes to deaths on our roadways.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond. Laura, that's exactly why in the TISMO meeting, I brought up the rates because, you know, year after year, we see, okay, our target's zero, but this is the number. And while I know we don't want to set a target of a rate or anything, but if there's something at least that we can, you know, hold to see if we're headed in the right direction. And number of crashes to me doesn't really tell me anything. Number of fatalities and number of serious injuries. And so more the rate is I feel more important to know how we're doing towards this goal.
Gordon?
I just had a question on how, once we set these goals and then we send this to the state for approval or adoption, I would just wanted to kind of reiterate what Kelly said at TISMO, and I know we're going to get a presentation on the priorities with DOT, but I wanted to know if there was any type of correlation to if we're at hitting our goals of 60%, does that mean that the projects that are being resurfaced on the state roadways need to keep going at the same rate to maintain that? Or are we going above that so that we can try to prioritize some of the money for safety as well? Because it just seems like we're not talking together, I guess. Where we talk about we want to have zero fatalities, we want to have this, and then we have our pavement condition comes in, and then when rubber meets the road, we're paving roadways, we're not actually doing safety. So I just wanted to see if this ties into some of the prioritization with the state as well.
Well, what I would say for the pavement conditions specifically, we are not tracked as much as the state is. If they're not meeting their goals, then they are required to come up with a plan to remediate and meet those goals. I don't know at the state level, I don't know that I can speak to whether or not they shift funding if they're doing better on pavement condition to be able to address some of the other performance metrics here. What do you want to add? Oh, there we go.
Wasn't sure for the protocol if I could add to it.
Absolutely.
Maintaining the pavement surface and the pavement conditions is a statutory requirement. So in order to be able to adjust that, it would have to go back to legislator for those requirements. That is definitely a concern when we're talking about when we have to make any adjustments to the program, is the funding. You know, it's like, what is the funding really allocated for? Is that to rehab the pavement, or is that for anything else that's additional? And that is the problem we have been in the last few years, is that when we're adding additional items, much needed safety items, but it is taking away from the payment condition and meeting that statutory requirement. So it's a transition of trying to balance that at each time. We have been talking for a while about, look, collaborative funding. Everybody's got to bring something to the table. It's almost impossible to consider one source of funding to be able to solve everything, especially when it comes to restoring the pavement as well as adding any safety components, maybe upgrading criteria, which is also needed. The pavement has a life. And that's how these projects surface. It's, 10 to 15 years, and that's how they become resurfacing projects. And so some of these other needs may come in between those intervals. So I think it's a much broader discussion. It's definitely justified, but yeah, it's something to discuss further. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, this is an action item, so may I get a motion for approval?
Hardwick, motion for approval.
Second, Castellano.
Thank you. This is a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. All right, now we're on the TAC only presentations. There are two TAC only presentations today. The first one, Ms. Catherine Alexander Corbin with FDOT with District 5 will present the tentative 5-year work program.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Here, it's a time of the year we present the tentative work program. This cycle, we're talking about fiscal years 26 through 30. Many of you are involved in this annual process. It's where we allocate the priority and the fundings to transportation needs, and that includes any transportation planning, systems maintenance and operation activities, engineering design, right-of-way acquisition, as well as construction activities. Each of the districts develops their tentative work program. These are then combined and these are actually submitted to our state secretary, and they are reviewed under executive board and executive review. That is going to occur. I should transfer my slide. I apologize. Start talking before my slide. All right. So, so we all submit it to our executive office, and then that is reviewed, and then ultimately it makes it over to the governor and legislature for review. At that point, when it gets transferred over to the governor and legislature, it is now the statewide tentative work program. And it follows a process of review before it is officially adopted July 1st. So what you're seeing on this slide are those key dates for this annual cycle. We held our work program public hearing December 2nd through the 6th. All the districts submitted their tentative work program to the executive office for DOT on January 15th. It's going to go through the executive and the Florida Transportation Commission review February and March. The governor and legislature, it'll make it to them in March, and then we have legislation session begins, and ultimately we get through the review and approvals for official adoption July 1st. We have to build a program that meets certain requirements, and what you see here are the priorities and the order of how we program the needs and for the department and for our region. Safety is the first priority, safety programs, as well as anything that we do within our projects. Next, we have our preservation. We have to include pavement condition of state highways, state maintained bridges, as well as the maintenance of the state highway systems. And then lastly, we have meeting the statutory requirements for public transportation. And this includes aviation, transit, rail, and ports. And although we are not the lead for those type projects, the funding does funnel through the work program. So you can see here that when we have more needs than we have availability of funding after meeting all of those priorities, and that we have very limited capacity for any new projects or phases for discretionary funding. In the inverse side, if our needs decrease, then we have more money available so that we can then add projects or add phases, subsequent phases to our work program. For this tentative work program cycle, we have some influence factors. First is the allocations of revenues. Ultimately, the goal of our tentative work program is to build a program that is balanced to the available resources. We also have to meet certain program areas. Those are target areas, so it becomes a challenge trying to make everything happen. But we do ultimately. So the very first impact we have is allocations of revenues. This is the funding source to the tentative work program. And we didn't anticipate any wild swings left or right with the revenue estimating conference this year. They are very conservative. We did have a decrease in our state funds due to those conservative revenue projections, and we had a slight increase from our rental car surcharge projections. Very minor influence there and all those. And overall, the general consensus from the revenue estimating conference is that there's an expectation of growth to decelerate to 1 to 2% or 1 to 1.9% over the current and the next fiscal years as we stabilize coming out of this high inflation, high interest environment. But overall, they had a projection of a decrease of $127 million or 0.4% over the upcoming 5 years. Another influence factor is what comes out of our decisions and policies and statutes. So there's changes that need to be made from year to year to our funding and allocations based on what anything comes out of these three things. In the springtime, the department gets together, all the districts discuss what their priorities are jurisdictionally and statewide. And some programs have to be adjusted so we can reallocate funding to other critical areas. In this cycle, resurfacing was one of those programs. The lane mile allocations were reduced as well as the lane miles for some of the districts. So we can then focus on some of that funding into other areas that are critical across the state. Some of those critical areas were our bridge repair and replacement. There's a couple major bridges that are going to be needing some replacement and repairs in the upcoming years. Truck parking maintenance, our ITS maintenance, our rest areas, and as well as additional funding for safety program. And then lastly, no surprise to many, is we are still facing the influence of economic variables into our work program. What you're seeing here is the actual cost comparison for some of our major cost groups from fiscal year 23 to 24. As you can see, they're pretty significant. Currently in fiscal year 25, we're halfway through the year, a little bit past it, and it's actually kind of trending downward, but there's still an increase in the cost for construction projects. You may recall that last year I shared a slide that showed a cost representation of 1 mile resurfacing. And at that point, we were at 27% increases from 22 to 23, I'm sorry. Well, we had additional almost 8% increase from 23 to 24. Even with the stabilizing in the last few months, it's still higher than we were at our lowest point. We're at 55% higher than we were back in 21. So we're still seeing those increases as it influences what we can do with our work program. So in order to balance some of the objectives that we had to include this cycle, we focused on three principal ideas. As one, we wanted to leverage all funding that we have available and apply that towards delivery of regionally significant needs. So significant projects for our 3-county area. We also limited our programming to estimate updates. So for project phases that were already included in our work program. So there was very minimal new projects added, unless it was funding that was eligible for that type of a project exclusively, or it was a program target area like our resurfacing program. And then last, we looked at minimizing the project schedules to the extent possible. So we try to minimize the effect of referrals. We have very large projects. We have, significant projects within our region, and we want to make sure those projects remain in the upcoming 5 years. Large projects are hard to accommodate in a balancing effort when there's limited funds and a lot of needs. What you see here is the breakdown for the 3 counties per year. You can see it's over $2.2 billion. And then here's a breakdown by the project type. We have this information available, so if it's interested, we can provide it and how I think we comprise these numbers for the table here. But I will note just some of the items that contribute to these numbers and some of these project types for each of the counties. For Orange County, multimodal is one of the largest, about $215 million towards aviation. There's also a significant project, rail bridge replacement, $84 million that you'll see later on in the slide. And there's $330.5 million for transit. There's a couple of capacity projects that are significant dollars within Orange County. There's Moving Florida Forward, which is a governor initiative that is reflected in this number, as well as another regional significant project, which is the State Road 40 East, 50, not 40, State Road 50 East. And it's a capacity project. This is also represented in the upcoming 5 years. For Osceola County, we have the John Young Parkway Pleasant Hill Road project. That is an improvement for the area, $117 million in fiscal year 28. And then we have also a Moving Florida Forward project that's represented in the numbers. There's also truck parking in Osceola County with $66 million represented in the upcoming 5 years. And for Seminole County, it's very heavy on the resurfacing on the maintenance preservation side. We have several resurfacing projects that you'll see here in the upcoming slides. We also have truck parking in Seminole, and we have $30 million programmed in fiscal year 26. So I'm just going to highlight, like I mentioned, the newly funded projects, things that are new this cycle. I'll go over the list of our deferred and deleted projects. And some of these are projects of interest, and then just give some information general about grant awards. Starting off with resurfacing, and this is part of, like I mentioned, our maintenance and preservation projects. We have a couple of projects that have been programmed for Orange County. As you can see there, it's close to 14 miles, one along State Road 436 and the other along 437. Osceola has one project, US 192, and it's close to 25 miles. Seminole has 4 projects where the payment will be rehabilitated in the upcoming years. And as you can see there, there's about close to 40 miles of resurfacing. As you can see, these projects are new this year. They're going to go into design in 26 and then with construction in 28. Most of those. All right. Capacity projects on the left-hand side here, I mentioned the State Road 50. This is a regionally significant project. It runs from Avalon to 520. This project was in the work program previously. It was represented with 2 FM. That project has been segmented into 3 financial numbers now, financial management numbers, FM. You now see those 2 new numbers represented here for the original project, which was a -7. The limits are the same. However, the -1 project has now been shortened Perry Lane to east of Chuliota Road, and that's going to go to construction in 27. And then the other segment, which is further west, it is the segment 2 under the new FM number, and that's going to go to construction in 29. On the right-hand side, you see a Seminole County project. This is a federal earmark project where they're doing capacity improvements on County Road 419. Roadway intersection projects, these benefited from our safety program funding. So that's why this is another program area that has eligible, it's exclusive to the type of improvements that you can make. And what you can see here on the left-hand side, there's 2 traffic signal improvement projects. There's one on 527, and then there's one on Curry Ford and Goldenrod. And then there's also a pedestrian improvement in Winter Park. On the right-hand side, you see a couple more projects. The first one is an operational improvement when we're adding a westbound turn lane in Sanford along State Road 46. And then we have an urban corridor improvement project. This is with the city of Castleberry. This is a local agency project. And then last on the bottom, this is a Seminole County project. Seminole County has done the design for this work. What they're doing is they're going to go ahead and advance that funding so that project can go out as it goes with a DOT project. It actually is very efficient to go ahead and put them together because of the location, and it was added this cycle. Couple of pedestrian and bike improvement projects you see here on the left. One is with the city of Orlando, building some sidewalks. This is along I-4 downtown area, some areas around I-4, outside of I-4 clearly. And then we have Osceola County. It's the Safe Routes to School projects for Hickory Tree. This is in St. Cloud. Truck parking, significant for our area, helps with the vitality of our economic growth and continuing to move things around our area. Orange County, we have design for that location that is along Sand Lake Road and John Young Parkway, $4.5 million in 27. And then for Osceola County, we have right-of-way and environmental and construction has been added to the work program in fiscal year 27, over $66 million. I mentioned that project in Orange County that represents a good amount for the county numbers. This is it. This is the Sunrail Bridge over 1792 over in Maitland. That bridge will be replaced. The construction of that is in 27, begins in 27, $84 million. And right now they're going under final design. Aviation funding with several airports in our region and significant airports. There's funding, new funding. This is additional funding this cycle that they have received. And these are for operational preservation capacity improvements. So Orange Orlando International Airport, $32 million for taxiway improvements. We have Orange Executive Airport, over 2.7 infrastructure improvements for that airport. Seminole Orlando Sanford Airport. $27.5 million for operational preservation and capacity improvements in the upcoming year. And the parts we don't like, but sometimes they're necessary. We had 4 deferred projects in Orange County. I mentioned the State Road 40 East. It's, again, significant project. It's the 3rd of the newly segmented 2 projects. This is the furthest east one, State Road 50 from Chuliota to 520. That project was deferred a year, went from 29 to 30, and that's to be able to accommodate construction for the other segments since they're now being offset. We want to avoid the overlap of the contractor and also for balancing. We also had a deferral for State Road 424, a traffic signal project. That project was deferred from 26 to 28. And on the bottom, on the left-hand side, I mentioned that we had adjustments to our resurfacing program. This was a project that did have to defer because of those lane mile adjustments for the district, State Road 527. And confirming the payment, the condition of the payment, it is able to accommodate that deferral for the new construction year. On the right-hand side on the top, State Road 434, it is a capacity project in Orange County. That project did have to defer. Work program balancing is very challenging to keep so many of these mega projects in the original years. That project was deferred from 28-29, but it is still within the work program. One project did advance. This is an airport project. The capital grant advanced from 26 to 27. Sometimes we have deleted projects. Things change from when we originally programmed. A lot of factors come into this and new direction takes place. And although they are deleted, a lot of these have the justification on the left-hand side. These are sidewalk bundle construction projects, apologize. These were deleted because all of these were combined into another project. So it's an administrative deletion. The scope of work and the construction is still going to take place. On the right-hand side, you see two projects, one with the city of Winter Spring and one with Seminole County. These were construction projects that the agency has decided to take on themselves, so the programming in the work program was deleted. Here you see the administrative side of the deletion of that number for the State Road 50 East. The original project number for those limits was 239203-7. Again, that's now represented in a different FM number with two sequences and with new years. So this FM number did have to be retired, so that's why it's deleted. Then we have an I-4 project that fell along the moving Florida forward I-4 corridor. So that was incorporated. This was deleted so it could be incorporated into that project. On the bottom left, we see 44383-1. That is a traffic operations improvement that ultimately they decided to go back and review the scope and eliminated the right-of-way needed there. So that was deleted. And two projects here on the left-hand side on the top. These were projects, one in Seminole, one in Orange. They were resurfacing projects, but these were projects that were slated for concrete rehabilitation. Turns out that it wasn't needed. The asphalt is in good condition, so those projects were deleted from the work program. And then one project did move out, and it moved out of the 5-year work program. And the reason for that is because it's landscaping along I-4, and it doesn't make sense to come in and put that in if the moving forward projects are still underway. So we're going to wait for those to complete before the landscape can come in and do their last beautification of the roadway. And there were some EV charging projects, operations, grants that we had in the work program that because of balancing and reprioritizing of projects, they did get deleted, but they will be considered in the future. So sometimes, like I mentioned, it's a challenge with the funding and the resources, revenues and allocations received. So it's always nice to know that there is the opportunity for grants, competitive grant funding. Our contact person at the district is Alice Giuliani. She's a great resource. And if interested for any of our local partners, that if there's something that you see fits a grant, she would be glad to assist and provide and share information. Clearly, we have history of grant awards in the past. So it's a good opportunity to solicit that funding for any other critical needs that may have a challenge making its way through the work program. And I will close out. We didn't come in December, but we were all very busy. I think all of us contributed to the response to several of the hurricanes that we had in the area. Some of us at the district office were either sitting on county EOCs or actually going out flagging, assisting our ops centers. But I did have a quick video I wanted to share on that from FDOT. and that extension of thanks goes out to everybody here, because I know everybody else here probably participated in some way getting us all back on track after the hurricanes. So with that, I'll open up to any questions or comments.
Thank you for the presentation. We are running out of time, so if you have a question that will be beneficial for the group, otherwise, if you could kind of touch base offline. But with that, if there's any questions, yes.
I have a quick question. We heard about the change from R to POP. Have those elements that were removed through that process, were those deferred or deleted, evaporated? Will we see those again?
They definitely stay in the record for the project as something that was not able to be implemented. So by terms of administrative deferred, deletion would not be the case because they were not programmed. That's just a formality, but that history on that project remains and is to be looked at in the future for the potential. I think a lot of it's not my area, but I know from working with the scoping group on what they're doing is really extending that offer to see if there's anything that's critical that needs to be added, even to the maintenance resurfacing projects. Is there a way that we can incorporate that with some other kind of funding, something to help with constructing those items?
I do have a question that might be beneficial for the group. So with the limited funds and construction costs increasing each year, is it possible for local jurisdictions to fund a project in full and in advance that is listed on the 5-year program or even beyond that in FDOT's long-range plans to expedite the project, and then the localities can get reimbursed during the fiscal year that the projects were originally slotted for? Is that possible, or?
It is possible, and that has been done. We definitely encourage if there's a need for a project, it needs to be discussed, bring it up to the department. That is the circumstance with a couple of these projects that are in our upcoming work program. That is the way with the Seminole project that I mentioned there, that I saw the funding was added. It was because of the funding that was added, and then it will be reimbursed to the county in the future.
Okay, and who would be the contact for that?
You can contact me.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you're working on a project specifically or exclusive that what you're thinking about, keep it simple. Just contact me.
Understood. Thank you. All right, the last presentation would be from Mr. Sayosi Fine with Florida Turnpike's Enterprises with their tentative 5-year work program.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Siaosi Fine, and I'm with the Florida Turnpike Enterprise. I will be discussing the tentative work program for fiscal years 2026 through fiscal year 2030 for the Turnpike. So in the Metro Plan Orlando area, the enterprise is proposing to fund over $381 million in major projects. As part of the FDOT, Florida's Turnpike Enterprise considers the 5 pillars of the FDOT compass when building our work program. The 5 pillars are safety, resiliency, supporting a robust supply chain, technology, workforce development, and this all supports our communities. To help meet the state's transportation needs, the enterprise primarily receives funding through user tolls, as well as concessions at our service plazas, primarily on our Turnpike main line. The Turnpike must pay for operations and maintenance costs first, and this includes the cost to collect and process toll payments. Then we invest revenue into renewal and replacement projects. So these are our resurfacing projects as well as other reoccurring improvements on our roadways. Finally, the enterprise uses the remaining funds to pay for capital improvement projects. These capital improvement projects include our interchange projects, our widening projects, and our roadway expansion projects. So before I talk some more about the work program, I'd like to update you on the Turnpike Widening Infrastructure Initiative. So this initiative looks to widen the Turnpike main line to at least 6 lanes. And that goes all the way from the mainline extension in Miami-Dade County in South Florida all the way to the I-75 terminus in Wildwood. So this initiative, it looks to provide additional capacity to help with relieve congestion, while also improving emergency evacuation times. Of course, enhance connectivity with local roads, improve safety with new signage, lighting, pavement markers, and drainage, and provide better visibility with additional continuous LED lighting on the roadways, and overall to improve travel experience. So Florida's Turnpike system consists of limited access facilities and provides Florida's residents and visitors with a safe, efficient, and affordable means of travel. Turnpike facilities are in all 7 FDOT districts and in 21 counties in Florida. In the Metro Plan Orlando area, there is 132 miles of existing Turnpike managed toll facilities. So this presentation that I'm giving this morning is actually based on a document called the Tentative Work Program Summary for the Turnpike. So this presentation is good, but this whole presentation actually is to push you toward reading this entire document itself. But this document, just to break it down, is made up of 3 parts. And the 3 parts are on page 1, going to page 2, you'll see that there's this first table. So these projects are current construction projects. These projects are currently under construction the current fiscal year or will be under construction. The next part of this document starts on page 4 and goes to page 11. And these are our main table projects. So these projects have construction funding associated with them in the 5-year work program. And finally, on pages 15 and 16 in the back, you'll see there's that final table. So these projects are projects that have PD&E design and right-of-way funding, but do not have construction funding associated with them in the 5 years, associated with the 5-year work program. So these are projects that you can look forward to in the future, but they don't have construction funding associated with them now. So I'd like to talk about the main table projects, those projects that have construction associated with them in the 5-year work program. So starting on this slide, we have in Osceola County, the widening of the Turnpike main line from Barton Settlement Road to Osceola Parkway. And this project has construction funding in fiscal year 2026 in the amount of $5.9 million. So construction for this project actually is scheduled to begin in fiscal year 2025. But the funding shown on there is for fiscal year 2026. The next project is the widening of the Turnpike main line from US 192 to Parton Settlement Road. And this project, and with interchange improvements at milepost 242 or at US 192. This project has construction funding in fiscal year 2028. And it has $174 million programmed in the 5-year work program. The third project is the widening of the Turnpike main line from milepost 239 to milepost 242. And this project is actually 239 to 242. It's from just south of US 192 to just south of Clay Whaley Road. And it has a new full interchange at Nolte Road. This project is a design build project and has construction in fiscal year 2026. Construction for this project actually began in fiscal year 2024. And the design build funding in the tentative work program is at $2.2 million. The final project on this slide is the Canoe Creek Service Plaza parking improvements with construction funding in fiscal year 2026. And it has $24.8 million programmed in the 5-year work program. Moving on to Orange County, the first project on the slide is the new interchange on the Turnpike Main Line at Sand Lake Road, which has construction funding in fiscal year 27 in the amount of $2.1 million. Construction for this project began in fiscal year 24. The second project is the interchange improvements on the Turnpike Main Line at State Road 528, also known as the Orlando South Ultimate Interchange. This project has construction funding from fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 28, and has $47.6 million programmed in the 5-year work program. The third project is the new interchange on the Turnpike Main Line at Taft Island Road. This project has construction funding in fiscal year 2027, and has $110.6 million programmed in the tentative work program. And then the final project is the Tismo interchange improvements on State Road 528 at John Young Parkway, which has construction funding in fiscal year 2026 and has $14 million programmed in the 5-year work program. So moving on, we'll be talking about that last table of projects, those projects that have PD&E design and right-of-way funding, but do not have any construction funding associated with these projects. So the first project on the slide is the Turnpike Main Line widening from State Road 408 to State Road 429. This project has design and right-of-way funding, and this is just on the northbound side of the Turnpike Main Line. And then the second project, which is the widening of the Turnpike Main Line from State Road 408 to State Road 429 on the southbound side. This project has design funding in 2030. The third project is the widening of State Road 429 from US 192 to Western Way. This project has design and right-of-way funding programmed, design in 2026 and right-of-way funding from 2026 to 2027. The fourth project is the widening of State Road 429 from Western Way to Sidell Road. This project has design funding in fiscal year 26 and right-of-way funding from fiscal year 27 to fiscal year 28. And the final project on this slide is the widening of the Turnpike Main Line from State Road 60 to south of Clay Whaley Road. And this project has PD&E funding. So this project is actually under PD&E right now and has PD&E funding program for fiscal year 2026, and that's just for the remainder of the PD&E. Staying on those projects, those the last table projects. On this slide, the first project is the widening of the Turnpike Main Line from milepost 238.5 to milepost 239.4. And that goes from just north of Three Lakes Service Plaza to just south of Clay Whaley Road. That project has design in 2030 programmed. The next project, which is a partnership project with the Corridors Office of the FDOT, is the widening of I-4 from west of County Road 532 to east of Osceola Parkway. So that's just the name of the project. But the design and right-of-way funding that you see on the slide, that's actually just for our portion of the project, which is the inclusion of interchange improvements at the I-4 State Road 429 interchange. And I believe it's 4 ramps that are coming from our State Road 429 facility onto I-4. The next project after that, the third project on this slide, is also another partnership project with the Corridors Office of the DOT, and that is to construct the Poinciana Connector, which is a new roadway extending the existing Poinciana Parkway extension, or Poinciana Parkway, all the way to State Road 429 at I-4. And this project, so this is actually being managed by the Corridors Office, and we're just a funding partner. But this project has design funding in fiscal year 2026 through fiscal year 2027, and has right-of-way funding in fiscal year 2027. And then the final project on the slide is the widening of the Seminole Expressway from County Road 427 to north of Reinhardt Road. And that project has design funding in fiscal year 2029. So for more information on all projects in the Turnpike's Tentative Work Program, you can visit the FDOT Work Program Public Hearing website and download the District 5 Public Hearing Report. The Turnpike's Tentative Work Program projects can also be found on our website, which is floridasturnpike.com. And I'd just like to leave you with a safety minute. The Florida Move Over Law requires you to move over a lane when you see stopped law enforcement, emergency, sanitation, utility, tow trucks, construction vehicles with warning lights, or any disabled vehicle on the side of the road. It also implores you to slow down. If you can't move over, or if you're on a 2-lane roadway, slow down to 20 miles less than the posted speed limit. And if the speed limit is 20 miles per hour or lower than that, slow down to 5 miles per hour. But with that being said, that's the end of my presentation. If there are any questions or comments, I'll take those down.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Thanks, CLC, great presentation. For the Turnpike's widening infrastructure initiative, just to know like how those projects are prioritized. I know that you said that the initiative is to make sure that the Turnpike main line is 6 lanes, you know, throughout its limits, all the way from Miami up to Wildwood. And definitely there's parts in Osceola County where that's not the case. But some of the projects that have sort of that Turnpike widening infrastructure initiative label already are, you know, 6 lanes. Not saying that they're not needed. Trust me, some of them are exactly where I live, and they're like super important, but just wondering like how those are prioritized, you know, if given the initiative being to make sure that the Turnpike's at least 6 lanes throughout the limits. There are obviously some areas that aren't.
So for those projects, the initiative is actually to get the Turnpike to 6 lanes. So initially, we have already existing widening projects. They fall under that initiative already. But it's just to get like the portions of the roadway that are 4 lanes right now, at least to 6 lanes. And then there are other projects all the way going to Wildwood that may be a little bit more than that. They'll be widening to 8 lanes. But they're part of the initiative because they're kind of they're capacity projects, and they're going past the 6 lanes, but they're widening to what the area needs. So I think it was just originally they were prioritized to at least get the 4-lane portions to 6 lanes. So those projects, they're scheduled all across the Turnpike main line currently in the tentative work program.
Yeah, I know especially the Lake County projects, I think are similar to, you know, existing conditions being 4 lanes in Lake County, you know, we need to get the Turnpike to 6 lanes. And then that is the similar existing conditions in lots of Osceola County, with existing only being 2 lanes in each direction. And, you know, but like I said, some of the projects that are in that initiative have funding, but the existing is more than 6 lanes already. So I know we're adding, you know, a lot more to it, and because it's needed, but it was just curious as to how all of those projects within that bucket are getting prioritized. So.
And I think that's kind of what I was saying was was getting those widening projects pushed forward on the 4-lane portions of the roadway to get those to at least 6 lanes. so those were prioritized to get into the work program, just to get those to 6 lanes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
We'll have, we have lots of 4-lane segments of roadway in the turnpike through Osceola County that won't have work program funding. That's a little bit of my concern too, but I know we'll probably, hopefully there's a plan to get there, but you know, just, we're keeping an eye on that.
Well, and there's also the another thing that was prioritized were the 2 PD&Es that we have going on. We have a PD&E that goes from State Road 70 in Fort Pierce, or in St. Lucie, all the way to State Road 60 in Osceola County, and from State Road 60 to Clay Whaley. So even those were pushed forward, prioritized, because those are looking at widening the those portions of Osceola County also.
Mhm. Yeah. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. The next item on the agenda is general information. There's several items in tab 5 of the agenda packets. So when you have the chance, please take a look. And the upcoming meetings of interest, the next TAC meeting is held in person on Friday, February 28th, and the next Metro Plan Orlando board meeting is held in person on February 12th. The full list is on the agenda. And the next item is the member comments and other business. If there's any short member comments to say, yes.
I'm sorry, I'll try to keep it short. I know we all want to get to lunch. But I see in the general information, the legislative positions for Metro Plan were included, and I was curious, I don't remember seeing a draft of that before that was approved by the board. So could Metro Plan staff confirm if we had had a chance to review these before those went to the board?
Follow up with you about that after.
Okay, well, so I have a couple of comments on that document that's included that relate to our, pretty much our whole discussion today. So the legislative positions included that were approved by the board, they're a little tepid. I think they lack some specificity, specifically when it comes to vulnerable users. It talks about protecting all modes, but as we've seen through the data, people walking and biking are at more of a risk. And then I also didn't see any mention, we always say we want to keep an eye on the red light camera enforcement, but there's no mention of monitoring the school zone automated enforcement in there. And I didn't see any mention of starting conversations or potentially reversing the overly restrictive lane repurposing legislation that went through the state last year, as well as our conversation today on the statutory requirement for resurfacing. If that's where the funding's going and it's based on statutory requirement, we should be starting conversations on if that is how we want to set our budgets based on that, or if we want to connect them to the statewide goals. So just wanted to provide that feedback on the legislative positions.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Then we'll move on to the last public comments. We will now hear public comments on all business. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. If any members of the public wish to comment or are joining us virtually, please use the raise hand function and you'll be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll send you a prompt to unmute your mic. Do we have anyone virtually who would like to make a comment?
We have no hands raised online, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone in person?
No comments from the room.
Thank you. Any written comments?
None received.
Right. If there's no other business, then we will stand adjourned at 11:52. Thank you.